Moving into part 2 of this series where we predict and discuss potential contracts being proposed to the existing Collingwood list going into the end of next season. And in that first series, we went through Bobby Hill, Billy Frampton, Maynard, Myercheck, Charlie Dean, Finlay McRae, Harvey Harrison. So if you haven't checked that out, be sure to watch that before you get through to this one. And we're going to start with player 1 of 7 for this video in Illaroo Smith. Big Roo came through in the mid-season draft and got some good minutes at VFL level in a struggling side and was one of the shining lights in what was an otherwise disappointing year for the VFL side with a bunch of injuries and a lack of continuity for the VFL side, which was a ripple effect from the AFL side, of course. Big Roo he's mayhem. He's chaos, isn't he? If you watch him, he's athletic. He likes to jump into his ruckman quite aggressively and is very active at ground level. So he's one of those players who could be some form of an extra midfielder, not necessarily by foot, but certainly at ground level, by hand, getting the handballs out to Nick Dacos, to Jordan De Goey, Josh Dacos, and the likes, right? I think there's a lot of potential, and we've potentially found another diamond in the rough in the mid-season draft. We got Ash Johnson in the past, we've got John Noble. So hopefully this is another one to tick off as a success from the list management side of things. He goes into his second year of service for Collingwood, and I imagine Big Roo, hopefully by halfway through next season, he's granted an extra 2 years, I would say. Being that taller ruckman player will take time to develop, still very young, and we will not see the AFL side next year if I had to guess. If capitulation happens, and maybe that is a possibility as the light has turned off, unfortunately, but we'll work through it. So there is potential there, and we need to persevere and be persistent with Big Roo after showing some promising signs. And I'm really excited to see how much he can develop over the course of this preseason. So I'll definitely be keeping a close eye, and I'll keep you informed as to how he's progressing in the preseason. Moving on to Jamie Elliott. Now this is an interesting one, right? Because 2023 had an amazing year. 2024 he started off like a house on fire and was one of the few positives early in the season for the AFL side. And then unfortunately had succumbed to this horrible foot injury where he could barely walk, his foot was turning purple, and we didn't really know about the timeline for his return to play. It was really kept in the dark, and we were hearing 4 weeks, 6 weeks. We were hearing this might be Jamie Elliott retiring. He's played his final game. That was some of the reports floating around. Whether they had much weight behind him is another discussion, but it was certainly flying around that we were uncertain about Billy Elliott's future. So it comes to return time. He does make his way back into the side in the second half of the year after overcoming that foot injury, and probably didn't really find his way in that second half of the year. Wasn't effective on the scoreboard and wasn't taking his marks and was a little bit clumsy at times. But given the injury, of course, this is going to happen. He's getting older, so it might take a bit longer for someone like Billy to get back into the rhythm of things. And I expect him to bounce back next year. And if all things go well, I would definitely be offering Billy Elliott a year, an extension of a year at the end of the year. Let him prove that he still has what it takes to play at AFL level, pending his injury status, right? Not his form and his performances, because we know what he's capable of. It's just, can he stay on the field now? The other question that might go begging is, will Jamie Elliott accept a 1-year contract, or will he want job security and financial promise and seek a 2-year contract elsewhere? That's when Collingwood will really have to consider, wow, do we want to make Billy Elliott a pie for life and commit to a risky 2-year contract, or do we let him go somewhere and sail on into the sunset at a different club, which would definitely feel weird. So interesting one, but I think he'll get a 1-year contract if Billy Elliott and his management side were to accept the terms of that contract length. Perhaps maybe add some incentives, player options and something, give him a bit of power for that 1-year contract, right? If he plays, for example, X amount of games in 2026, then we'll get him. We'll offer that extra year on top of the one that we're offering. Moving on, we've got number 3 of 7, Jeremy Howe, coming up to his 10th year at Collingwood since moving from Melbourne. And geez, that's a trade steal and deserves a video on its own. He goes into this year as an unrestricted free agent, much like Jamie Elliott, which I failed to mention. So just bear in mind, Jamie Elliott is an unrestricted free agent. So we could lose Jamie Elliott for nothing, especially if he does go somewhere else and isn't offered a massive contract. There might not be much compensation there. Same for Jeremy Howe. We could lose these players for literally nothing. Whereas in the past, Harry Perryman, who came as an unrestricted free agent to Collingwood via GWS still got compensation at pick 16 or something like that. I don't think that's going to be possible with Jamie Elliott and Jeremy Howe because the two variables that the AFL consider for compensation eligibility is contract length and salary. And I don't think they're going to hit the threshold on either of those ones if they were to go anywhere else. I would almost be willing to give Jeremy Howe, this is risky. I'd almost be willing to give him an extra 2 years because we still haven't sorted out our key defender stocks. And he plays that third key position defender extremely well. He was probably our best defender all year long, if you really look at it. And his versatility to go forward, if he's not playing well in the back line, I think he's still got 2 years in him. The question is, does he think he has 2 years in him? Does he want another 2 years? I would be willing to offer 2 years, albeit a little bit risky. But you do have to, at the end of the day, offer a bit more for these players to remain at clubs, especially with the power they have to consider options elsewhere. So, like I said, 10 years at Collingwood, goes in as an unrestricted free agent. I would be comfortable with a 2-year contract for someone like Jeremy Howe at some point throughout the year, maybe halfway through the year, to get a good feel of where he's at post the first 12 games of the season and give him that 2-year contract. Moving on to 4 of 7, Ollie Sullivan will be day by day, game by game. Will he find himself at AFL level? Will he break into the squad? Can he compete against Ned Long, Finlay McRae, Tom Mitchell, Pendlebury, then Dacos and De Goey are the upper echelons of the midfield. So that's who Ollie Sullivan will be competing with. And the question is, can he develop the composure and decision-making that he lacked a little bit at times in this season? That was probably his only knock on him, and he sort of fizzled out towards the back end of his first extended stint with the AFL side. So contract-wise, it depends. It depends how. If he goes really well and averages 20 disposals a game, 10 touches, you'd almost be giving him a three-year contract. But I think based on his trajectory in his career so far, he'll play well enough. If he plays well enough and plays at this level of competency, he probably gets another year or two. That's number 4 of 7. And then we got Mason Cox, who has served 11 years for the Pies, and another player who could essentially walk for nothing if he wanted to, and Collingwood would get no compensation, which could be a very real thing to consider in this situation. But I think Mason Cox might actually retire after 2025. I think he's got a few things working in the pipeline off the field. He's got his podcast. He's got to be mindful that his eyes have taken a beating and is risking his long-term health year on year. So I think he would want to go out with a bang, play really well, nurture the upcoming players, maybe even accept some sort of development role at Collingwood to some extent, stay within the club, maybe an ambassador for Americans to come to Australia, which he's already sort of doing, but I imagine he'd want to double down on that post his season. If he doesn't retire, you just give him another year and ask him to perform on a game-to-game basis to potentially prolong his career. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're now up to number 6 in Ned Long, who is an unrestricted free agent as he's been delisted by Hawthorn in the past. So another player who could walk for nothing. Ned Long, predicting his contract, is much like Sullivan and all the other fringe players, will depend on how he performs on a day-to-day basis, a game-to-game basis. He looked really promising. He's definitely got some ball about him and he's rugged in the contest. Something Collingwood are crying out for. It's just, can he take his game to the next level? So the contract length is quite broad for Ned Long. If he plays really well, 2-3 years. If he plays okay, maybe a year. If I had to predict, I'd probably go with a year at this point. Finally, we have Oscar Steen, who missed most of the year due to a knee injury or a foot, and played really well in the VFL in 2023. They decided, the list management side, to delist Begg, which makes more space for someone like Oscar Steen. They delisted Joshua Eyre. They delisted Kruger. They're putting Oleg Markov on the Ash Johnson more so on the rookie list as well. So I think they're trying to make space for Oscar Steen to break out next year. God willing that he has a really healthy preseason, because I haven't seen much of him, but a lot of people are really optimistic about where his career could go for Collingwood, for his time at Collingwood. So that'll be interesting. I don't really have a prediction for Steen because I just don't know what his ability is like, but I'm hearing good things, so we'll leave it at that. That's the next 7 have been completed, so we have another 7 more contract predictions to go through in the next video. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with my rationale behind these 7 players we've just discussed in Oscar Steen, Ned Long, Mason Cox, Ollie Sullivan, Jeremy Howe, Jamie Elliott, and Ilaru Big Roo Smith? Go Pies.